Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and we tackle them with biblical truth. Today we have a heavy topic. I would say heavier. It's very much in the spotlight of culture today, but I have a special guest on so we can discuss the trans issue, which is mainly tied to identity and the identity crisis with Gen Z and how adults in the culture is feeding into this. I have Phoenix on the podcast today. She is a Kiwi American. If you don't know what Kiwi is, that means she is from New Zealand. Sometimes people are like, what Kiwi? What are we talking about? A fruit? No, we're talking about a New Zealander who is now American. She's a wife, a mom, a Christian apologist, a writer, a speaker, and the creative director at Cross Examine. She wears a lot of hats with an unusual fondness for discussing challenging topics that many Christians avoid. I mean, that's the truth. Her goal is to help others confidently and clearly defend an Orthodox Christian worldview and consistently live that worldview out in the public square. Her areas of special interest are human identity and human rights and what the Bible has to say about them. And you might have already heard her on my podcast if you've been listening for a long time. She's coming on again. It's been about a year and a half. And then, of course, Phoenix has her own social media and she's out in the spotlight often with Cross Examine. So Phoenix, welcome to Her Faith Inspires podcast.
Hi, Shanda. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. And the reason why I wanted to ask you to have it is because, one, it's more pinpointed. I think last time we were talking even about a closer to home issue with you and you were on the podcast last time. It was a cousin or somebody who was kind of going through a transition, or either that or was identifying as the opposite sex.
Yes, yeah. I have a niece. I have a niece who has gone through the entire process as far as one can at this point.
Okay,
Yes.
exactly. So this time we're going to be talking, I mean, it's kind of evolving or has evolved as much as it can in culture. And I think even since then, things have gotten dramatically worse. We just had a guy on the Grammys who, one of them is a transgender and the other one's openly gay. And so this is becoming more and more of a, and then all of these, I guess all of these transgender drag queen shows where you're having these little kids being brought to them by their parents. So this is something that I feel like is even escalated since we last talked about it.
Yeah, I agree.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
So I'm excited
yeah.
to talk about it. I'm eager to talk about this. And the fact that you like to take on heavy topics is just a joy to my heart, because I think it's
They're the
important that
most interesting ones, you know?
they are the most interesting ones. They're the ones that everybody wants to talk about, but everybody's too afraid to talk about. And people who are really afraid, like Christians, usually have that platform. They're afraid to lose their following or book deals or something. Like, I wonder, why aren't these bigger name people, like Christian people, in the spotlight? Why aren't they talking about this? And I always wish I could just find that answer. Like, I wish somebody can answer that question for me. Maybe I'm judging too harshly with the whole, I think they're afraid of losing their following, but like, why not abortion? Why not talking about the trans issue as it relates to identity and things like that? But I heard somebody say last week, not every Christian needs to talk about every subject. And I kind of disagree with that in a way.
Yeah.
I
agree.
Like, if you're a Christian and it violates the word of God and it violates the truth, then you should be standing up and speaking about it, even if that's not your quote unquote platform. I think that's so dumb, because you've chosen that platform. Did God only like, it's the same as, oh my gosh, the guy who's the prosperity guy. Joel
Oh,
Osteen.
which one?
Yeah.
Okay. Joel,
that one. He says that God did not call him to speak on sin. So I'm like, you're a pastor, and that's the whole, Christianity. That's not where you have to stop, is that sin. But how do you even explain the good news without?
Oh my gosh. There is no good news if there's no bad news. And if you can't talk about the bad news, then what is the good news?
Exactly.
Insane. Actually, funnily enough, just recently I was pulling up a list of books by Joel. I don't remember why, but I wanted to see the list of titles he had written. And as I went through them, I realized, oh my goodness, this man is a motivational speaker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we kind of already know that, but to think of certain well-known pastors that have also had, multi-million dollar book deals and things like that, you think, oh no, that they've given the gospel light version probably in these texts. And just on a random day, I don't remember, I was researching something else and I thought, oh yeah, I'm curious, how many books has this guy written and what are their titles? And I went through each title and I realized, oh my goodness, God, Jesus, Bible, gospel, eternity, nothing is in any of the titles of his books, and yet he's a full-time pastor. I was
Mhm.
like, these are a series of books on he's a motivational
Right.
speaker.
Right.
And suddenly it just kind of, I don't it was like the obvious just slapped me in the face suddenly. So I was like, he's not even pretending at
Mm-mm.
this point.
Mm.
Yeah, so
No, he's not. And he still fills the seats and makes his money.
correct.
People are
Yeah,
gathering for themselves teachers who will tickle their ears. And that's the other side of this thing, right? So
yeah,
yeah, we're not going to shy away from the hard topics and not because we like the controversy. It's just because I believe as Christians, we are called to stand up and speak the truth no matter where it lands. If it lands on deaf ears, if it lands on ears who will actually hear it, that's not our job to be responsible for the outcome. It's our job to stand up and speak it because that's what God has called us to. And
yeah,
that's why I'm
definitely.
glad that you're not afraid to talk about this. So what does fascinate you about the topic of identity in particular, but as it relates to the transgender issue?
Yeah. Okay. So let me back up just a couple of steps because, this is obviously going to be like a five-part talk at this point. There's so much to say, and you're bringing up so many good points that I want to address this one you just brought up before I even launched into that. And that is why are pastors and public speakers, public faith leaders, why are so few willing to address these hard topics?
Mhm.
And yes, I agree with you. There's definitely, for some, there's going to be a financial um, aspect to it. This is their livelihood, and why rock the boat for themselves personally if someone else can do it for them? They're better off economically to not ruffle those feathers. But the thing I think is even more of a rising issue is they they'll say, I just need to preach the gospel, as in just the gospel, and as if somehow the gospel is completely detached from what is happening to our people and to our culture. They take the same attitude with anything political, which is now literally everything is political. Everything has been politicized. And then what a brilliant tactic of the devil. Like, okay, I know pastors are going to shy away from political topics. Okay, my strategy will be make everything political. At what point do you draw the line and say, no, I'm going to discuss this? Do you wait until the gospel itself is political
Right.
before you're willing to speak up? Because in some countries it is.
Right.
So to shy away from the mass genocide that's taking place in our nation, being abortion, and say, oh no, it's political. No, it's murder of the innocent. It's the
Mhm.
murder of an entire generation. You have to speak up for that.
Yeah.
Same thing with the LGBTQ agenda. Same thing with transgenderism. All of it. It's affecting our children,
Mhm.
and it's coming from the top down, and we absolutely have to speak up. So the mantra just preach Jesus is such a wicked myth, lie, I don't know, it depends on what the person is thinking behind it, but it's just so wrong.
Mhm.
Jesus isn't a box
Mhm.
that can't touch these other things. He touched everything.
Right. Right. Yeah,
That's my
that's a
little
great point.
rant on that.
No, that's great because I think, when I've been studying the ins and outs of the George Barna's American Worldview Inventory, and with as many people that claim to be Christians in the US, the largest worldview within Christianity itself is moralistic therapeutic deism, which is all mostly
Mhm.
on emotion and loving people and letting them find their authentic selves and things like that. And
Mhm.
I feel like when people do use that excuse of just preach Jesus, you have to ask, what did Jesus preach? What do you mean when you say that? Like what, and when
Yeah.
you say the gospel, there's a lot of people who claim to be Christians and haven't even shared the gospel in the last year, 2 years.
Mhm.
And if they do, they don't really know what the gospel message itself, translating that, communicating that to somebody else even means. What would you say if you were to share the gospel?
Yeah.
And so there's a whole lot more to when somebody says that. It may sound good off the cuff when you're like, oh, okay, maybe they're right. Maybe I should just share the gospel. Maybe I should just love other people. But you got to dig in deeper to that to see what are they saying? Is this something that they're coming up with on their own? Or is this something that they're taking? Because I believe if you share the gospel, you're going to say, like we said at the beginning here, what Joel Osteen doesn't want to say. You're going to be talking about some things that in our depravity and our sinful nature, we're going to see the culture in that. And we're going to see that's what God can save you from, this identity crisis that we're in, where you're trying to tell kids that they were not made. Basically, when you quote unquote affirm the fact that they're a little boy trapped in a little girl's body or whatever, you're telling them you're not good enough. You weren't made properly. Well, of course, they're going to be confused by that and look for the solution. And so the gospel, the true gospel, when you talk about all of these things, answers those questions, answers those hardships. So that's a great point, Phoenix, and something that the church needs to be aware of when we see those, pithy statements or whatever. We need to say, what's the deeper message here?
Oh my gosh, almost every pithy statement I come across these days, this is the beauty of being trained in just logic and apologetics is to stop and question, what do they mean by this and this? Because when you break it down, they're actually saying nothing, or
Yeah.
they're saying something that just contradicts itself, or uh, just there's so much deception and vagueness, and it's intentional.
Yes.
And good grief, I just wish people would stop and use their thinking caps. To
Mm.
use an old expression, put your thinking cap on and don't just accept a statement and think that sounds good. I won't challenge it.
Yes.
Um, and the
Yeah.
other thing I would just say before we move on is you cannot share the good news. There is no good news. The good news is a solution to a problem. The good news isn't just good news, period. There's only good news if it's a solution to a problem. So there's no way of bringing up the solution without presenting a problem.
Mhm.
And I know I'm basically just repeating the point I made earlier, but I'm using different words. But whatever it
Good.
takes, people,
Whatever it
please.
takes. Exactly. Yes. No,
Yeah.
it's great. It's a great way to say it. So maybe that's why this topic fascinates you. The topic of identity.
A topic of identity, because it's woven into almost every trending movement at the moment, and I see the twisting of how we form our identity, where our identity comes from, how we decide our identity, all these different things. The concept of identity has been idolized um, recently, like within the last several decades. I mean, let's face it, identity matters. It's always mattered. If you're human, if you breathe, the concept of your identity matters to a certain extent, but it's constantly being redefined. I When you didn't have this whole host of options about who you could be or perhaps what you could do professionally, your father was a farmer, you're a farmer, and your children will be farmers because you live in the middle of nowhere and it's the 1700s. I mean, you're not forming your identity around your occupation. It'd be silly to ask someone, "Who are you?" and have them scratch their head and say, "I guess I'm a farmer." They say, "No, that's what I do. I'm a farmer. My father was a farmer." They weren't so obsessed with how they construct who they are
Mhm.
the way we are today. And it started with the explosion of technology and suddenly people having so many different paths they can take and then attaching their identity to what they do. That's been a long term problem, probably for the last 50 plus years of I am a banker, I am a this, and people would stick with that career. They didn't switch jobs and they would typically fall into a massive depression when they retired and really struggle for purpose and things like that. That's an old problem that we still see today, but now it's expanded so much more with the sexual revolution, and I like there's so much to dive into about how we got here today. It didn't start with boys wanting to be girls, girls wanting to be boys. It didn't even start with I have feel same sex attraction, and now this is who I am. This is, I mean, but that's another whole big piece. It started back in the 17th and 18th centuries when people like Freud sat down and said, everything about you, everything about your purpose, everything about your pursuit of pleasure revolves around your sexuality from and how you express that sexuality. And from there, these thinkers that most of our kids haven't even read on, this is where these ideas trickle down from, eventually made its way to 1950s America, where you've got that Freudian undercurrent, plus the invention of the birth control pill, and suddenly not only is sex your only path to happiness, and so anyone who stands in the way and how you want to express that is oppressing you. That's the other redefinition. Oppression changed from an economical situation to a psychological one. From the 1950s on, you've got the pill, you've got a redefinition of oppression. So it's moved from economics to psychology, and a redefining of how one finds happiness, and it's all connected to your sexual pleasure. Now you can have unlimited sex without getting pregnant, and kaboom, everything we see today trickles from these key moments in our recent history. So it fascinates me because it's destroying us. And I see just a constant web of lies pouring out of it. I'm seeing young people and old people being shattered by it, being lost. The suicide rate is not dropping. If anything, it's growing. I'll be honest, it's not like it's spiking. It's maintained a fairly consistent pace over the last 20 years. Gosh, if we are actually reaching solutions, it should be plummeting, but we're not. It's slowly growing. These options are not solutions to the underlying issues people have.
Yeah.
And I'm just tired of the lies. I'm not perfect. I try to be honest all the time, but I hear pastors talk about how, you're either a truthy or a gracie. You're someone who really holds firm to truth, like, no, black or white, this is how it is. And others that are capable of being more empathetic and saying, okay, well, I can understand where they're coming from. Let's be kind, let's be gracious. Jesus was both. I struggle with the grace side. I'm definitely stronger on the truth side. That's not an excuse. I need to bring both to the table at all times. But since this is something I'm passionate about, this is something I'm going to run with. And I'm going to lean on my brothers and sisters in Christ who are better at the grace and the pastoral care. We each do what we've got to do without using it as an excuse to neglect those other things.
I get that because I feel like I was very black and white growing up. It was like wrong, right. And then a lot of times I still look to categorize those things, right? Then in the wrong category.
Yeah.
I really had to work on the grace part. I think part of it that helps is that I am a people pleaser. So it's kind of like, all right, let's work together here. But at some point, there are some things that are just right and wrong. And when it comes to this issue, we see a lot of where you can categorize those things. So those are good points. I love hearing that. And I like your honesty too. I mean, like truth or grace. Yeah, it's a hard balance, but I think humans have a hard time balancing a lot of things in life. But I think if you're aware of it, then you can enter in to say, I err on the side. I would say if you're going to err on the side of anything, err on the side of truth, because you can't have any love without truth anyways. Truth without love isn't, love without truth isn't, it's not love. We see that in Romans 13, 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul tells us what love is and what love is not. So for me, I'm like, if you're going to err on the side of anything, err on the side of truth. Just remember that I don't care how you say it sometimes. Truth is truth. It's going to hurt. Even if I whisper it in your ear, if it's the truth, it's going to hurt. I don't have to say it loud. It doesn't matter if I say it soft. It doesn't matter if I say it with a tear in my eye. The truth doesn't care how we react to it. It is what it is. So that's why I say if you're going to err on the side of anything, err on the side of truth. So the statistic that I saw, and this is a little bit loose statistic, I don't know if it's like 18% or upwards of like 20% of the Gen Z generation identifies as LGBTQIA, yada, 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 whatever letters we have at the moment. Can you put that statistic into perspective for us as we look throughout like the generations, because I know that even Bill Maher was talking about this, like at this rate, by the time we hit 19 or 2070, everyone's going to be like transgender, right? If we continue to go towards this trend. And then what I really wanted to talk to you about too is that there are some people who are, I guess, intersex, right? So you have to, and a lot of people will bring that up, like, but yeah, what about these people? How does the transgender ideology relate to them when we're looking at these statistics, and how many people actually have that condition where we have to be, what do you do? Do you just say, okay, let's just go ahead and say that this is okay because you have some people who are intersex, or looking at the statistics where we see that growth over these generations? What is that telling us?
Yeah. So these are really, really fascinating points. We know that this entire concept and ideology is a social contagion because it is so predominant in a specific age group. It's not a biological thing. It is 100% a cultural thinking, social thing. If it weren't, we would see a consistent statistic from ages 12 through to 72. We don't. It's just plain and simple. I think at the moment it's roughly 7% of adults that identify as either LGBTQIA, whereas it's over, like you said, it's over 20% among Gen Z. So you tell me what the difference is. They're made of the same flesh and bones. They're still human. We're not talking about a different species of people. And it's a different mindset looking at these things. It's a different attitude toward what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and a different attitude toward testing boundaries and just living in this gray, living in this undefined world, which on the one hand they love, and yet on the other they hate. I mean, people love to have choice and options until they don't, until suddenly it messes everything up. They're riddled with anxiety. They don't know where to move. They don't know whether to go left or right. They don't know who they are anymore. They've been given so many options that, these kids are just stressed out, anxious, and depressed. So not only that, you see the difference in the statistics between different generations. It's growing in that sense, but also the pace of that increase. It's not like, okay, every year it's grown, the statistic has moved 0.5% and now we're here. No, it spiked. Like the last 10, 15 years, it spiked. First, it was with people coming out of the closet, as they like to say. And now in the last 5, 10 years, it's people identifying as trans. Nothing changed. Environmentally speaking, biologically speaking, nothing changed. What changed was the language and the message from the media, from politics, from pastors, from peers, all of it. That's what changed. And that is the definition of a social contagion.
So what age are they coming? Like, are they starting to realize like, oh no, never mind. I don't identify with the opposite sex. Is it around like 18, like older teens, early 20s? Do you know that number?
So this is a tricky one because there's different numbers depending on when you look at the studies. It used to be that children that began to show signs of gender dysphoria, from the end, and like legitimate gender dysphoria, we're talking from age of 5, 6, they're using language like, no, I don't like having a blank, whatever their body part is. I would rather be this. And I'm not talking about a little boy that likes to play with dolls sometimes. I have a little boy that sometimes plays with dolls. He has never once indicated, I'm a girl.
Right.
So I'm not talking about that, which is another avenue that, oh my goodness, when you hear people today, how did you know your son wanted to be a girl? Well, he liked pink and Barbies. And I'm thinking, okay, thanks for setting back feminism 50 years. Is that all you've got? Because when I was 4, I didn't like pink and Barbies. Was I a little boy?
Right.
No, like this is not this. That's not how you define femininity.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a fraction of the population more common among boys than it was girls. That statistic has completely reversed,
Mhm.
where now it's, for every one boy that is experiencing gender dysphoria, you've got about 10 girls.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it's
Did not
spiking
expect you to
in
say that. Wow.
middle school. What a shock. So let me rewind. For the last, like, let's say 100 years, I don't know how back the studies go, but let's say, the data before this became a cool trending topic was it was more common among young boys than it was girls. It raised its head around, let's say, as early as 4, 5, 6 years old. Something like 95% of cases resolved themselves simply by letting their bodies go through puberty.
Mm,
That's it.
mhm.
Puberty is nature's solution to anybody who's feeling a little confused.
Mm,
And who isn't confused as
right.
they're going through the ups and downs of puberty anyway?
Yep.
Those who still continue to struggle with it, they sought therapy. And depending on what was available at the time, either they just continue to live the rest of their lives feeling uncomfortable in their bodies, which sucks. One thing I hate that I'm seeing is people sort of looking at people who are wrestling with this dysphoria and just treating them almost like they're like they're these monsters, like they're just freaks of nature. And I think, can you imagine living with that kind of personal dysphoria in your body?
Yeah.
Like the ones that genuinely are going through it, and it's not the same number that we're seeing now, the ones that are seriously going through it.
Right.
I can't imagine. I mean, that sounds like hell on earth to
Yeah.
be waking up and knowing you're in this female form. You're just so uncomfortable in it. And I mean, again, a lot of that discomfort is also connected to sexual abuse in children,
Mm,
which is awful. Again, like, it is just all around this tragic situation. And that's where, for that group, they need love and pastoral care, and just walk it out with them, walk that life out with them, because they're going to be fighting it and wrestling it. Same thing with anybody that's wrestling with same-sex attraction, who wants to honor the Lord and not follow those desires and do what's best, either by remaining, single, or by choosing to have a hetero relationship and building a family, all the while knowing that they're going to wrestle with this.
right.
This is their thorn in their side, as Paul described.
Mm,
And it sucks. We all have them.
mm,
I praise God that that's not mine,
mhm.
but good grief, I have my own.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. So it's what makes us long for Jesus to come back, is we know that we're going to be wrestling with something. I feel like I'm going off base because I'm jumping back and forth between past and present.
No, it's
Today,
good.
today we're seeing a different trend. And okay, so your question was how, when do they come out of it? The terrifying thing is many of them may never come out of it now because of what we're doing to kids now. At the age of 11, 12, they only have to say, I think I'm in the wrong body. Bam, puberty blockers.
Mhm, mhm.
You have just sentenced that child to a lifetime of confusion because you have just chemically removed their body's ability to self-correct.
Yeah, now is it true though that after taking those for 10 years, they will get cancer or they can get cancer? Like I heard if they take, oh no, maybe that was taking hormones. Puberty blockers are hormone blockers though. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I
Okay,
don't know about the cancer. What I hear, okay, so obviously they're rendering themselves infertile, for one, if you're
right.
cool with that. Second of all, they do tend to see the three things that they see is increased rate of heart disease, increased rate of arthritis, because the hormones are not producing, or those bone density
Mhm.
growth. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not using the
Right,
right language,
right.
but basically, this is when your body is building out its structural frame and you're blocking that from happening.
Mhm.
Um, so increased osteoporosis, increased heart risk, and there's a third one that well, if obviously fertility is a big third one, but
So it
I
sounds
feel
like
like there's one more.
even the longevity of their lives is cut.
Oh, oh, no question. Yes,
Half.
every child that takes these has just knocked off 10, 15 plus years off their life.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. No question. Yes. And the other thing is they've also just committed themselves to a lifetime of medical bills
Mhm.
because you cannot transition.
Mm-mm.
You cannot. You can take the hormones, you can chop off parts of your body, but your body knows what it is. So you have to biologically, chemically force a square into a circle hole
Mhm.
every day for the rest of your shortened life.
Mm.
The day you stop taking those hormones, you might be in your 30s or 40s, your body's going to go,
Right.
it's going to try and autocorrect.
So if you're a
And
man,
we
you'll
don't
grow
know what
hair.
that looks like yet because we haven't had enough people do it.
Oh my gosh. Like when you stop and think about those things, like the
Mhm.
terminology is, well, I'd rather have a living daughter than a dead son. That
Oh
is
gosh.
just it's terrible because that is such a manipulation of
Yes.
emotions on parents because it's
Yes.
really not true. It is not
Yes.
true that you're not going, oh, I'm going to end up having, my living daughter because my son won't kill himself if I allow him to transition. You're ruining his life. Like you said,
Yes.
you'll never have grandchildren from this person because you and eventually when they, if they, like you said, I remember for one, I've taught middle school for years. And secondly, I
Mhm.
was a middle schooler at one time. Those are the most awkward years.
Mm.
We all know that middle school is one of the hardest age groups to teach because the kids are trying to figure themselves out. They're trying
Yeah.
to find their identities. They're in the middle of either going through puberty, the start of puberty. They haven't finished puberty yet. I don't know of one middle school
Mhm.
that's like, I'm a man, like they got their deep voice, their Adam's apple, and their beards. I mean, I'm not
Mhm.
saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it's not the norm. It's not the average. And so you have these
Mhm.
kids that are like, okay, which group do I identify with? Am I going to go with the jocks? Am I going to go with the people who dress all in black? I forget what
The goths.
the goths. There you go.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Which group am I going to identify with? And if you identify with them this year, it doesn't mean next year you won't change your mind. It doesn't. My nephew changed. He was a skater. He was a dirt bike rider. Then he was a cowboy. I mean, he was like trying to figure himself out for
Yeah.
several years throughout. And it's
Yeah.
almost the same thing. Like, how the haircut, the mullet has been like the in thing for the last couple of years. And most boys got a mullet. And I was like, oh my gosh, the Billy Ray Cyrus thing is back. Like,
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
I'd see the day. None of my
Yeah.
boys got into the mullet, but it's almost like that. Everyone's doing the mullet. Let's all jump on the mullet train. We call the barber and we go and we get a mullet. That's kind of what a social contagion is in this aspect, but it's much worse because we're trying to
Yes.
and we're finding our identity and no one's helping these kids and guide and direct their way. They're just saying, okay, in this postmodern world that we live in and to be loving, I have to let you do what you say you want to do because I
Mhm.
don't want them to kill themselves if I tell them no. Yeah.
Yeah. And statistically speaking, your kid is just as likely to end their lives because what's rooted in all this behavior is always, this is another statistic,
Mm,
every single kid that experiences gender dysphoria has a connecting underlying mental health issue. It's either anxiety, depression. Many of them also are, believe it or not, on the autism spectrum,
mm,
which comes with a whole host of challenges. You've got high functioning autism, so they're bright as anything, but they cannot figure out how to connect with people socially, which is its own living hell, right? You're smart enough to know you're different, but I'm incapable of doing anything about it. I'm just like, you're taking people who are in pain and telling them the answer is this life shortening,
mhm.
chemically castrating alternative. And it's wicked.
Yeah.
It's so wicked to do
Yeah.
this to our vulnerable children. And so, I mean, you hear the conviction in my voice. I've done the research. You don't have to dig very deep to
Mhm.
get these numbers and get this information and feel completely empowered to stand against it.
Yeah.
There, for me, I feel no hesitation in saying, absolutely not. You must not do this to your child.
Yeah.
Get therapy, get help, support her, support him. This is evil.
Mhm.
Don't do it to them. Don't do it to them. There are going to be lawsuits out of control in the
Mhm.
next 10, 15 years
Yeah.
from these poor kids that are now in their mid 20s realize the whole thing was a mistake and they can't reverse it. They
Mm,
can't.
mm,
There's another myth. Puberty blockers only pause puberty. As soon as you stop them, puberty kicks in. Utter lie.
Mm,
Utter lie.
mm,
Do you know a 20-year-old that suddenly goes into puberty? That
yeah.
doesn't happen. You
Mhm.
have a window of time. Your body has built in to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like telling someone, well, if you take this drug while you're pregnant, we can pause the pregnancy. The body doesn't work like that. Your body knows that during month 4 and 5, it's working on organs A, B, and C, and neurons C, D, and F. It's a plan. It's
Right.
all marked out. You can't hit pause on that.
No, no. So what about the intersex people who identify or not identify, I guess, diagnosed as intersex with that's a real thing. And everybody wants
Yeah.
to use that as the excuse. It's
Yeah.
almost like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this is again another example of just how terribly inconsistent and illogical the people on the transgender ideology side are. I mean, it's an argument that just you just flick it and it collapses. So let's use intersex people as an example. Someone who is born with either they call it ambiguous genitalia
Mm,
or someone who has a chromosomal anomaly. They can have a combination of the two, or they can have one or the other. Okay, my brain is overloading with responses. Let's start with the first one. If identity has nothing to do with biology, if gender has nothing to do with biology, why are you bringing up a biological case to further your point?
mm,
It doesn't line up. I am a purely healthy biological male, but gender is not connected to biology, so I can identify as a woman.
right.
How does the fact that biological anomalies occur, how does that improve your statement, your argument? It doesn't. It
Mhm.
doesn't at all. They may say, okay, so someone who is intersex at some point has to choose which way they're going to go. Correct. They typically are going to go with what aligns best with their biology. Um, it is what it is. In fact, funnily enough, well, not funnily enough, but there's activists in the intersex community who have been rightfully fighting to stop genital surgery on infants that come into this world with what they call, like I said, ambiguous genitalia. And the doctors and parents are thinking, well, it kind of looks more like a this than a that. Let's remove the that so that it can be this, and we'll just save this child save them from all the confusion of having um weird stuff in their pants. And just solve the problem for them right here because it looks more like this than that. And unfortunately, they've got it wrong. Sometimes they've got it wrong, and then they haven't told the child, and the child has been wandering around thinking, why do I feel like a girl but I no, it's usually the other way around if we're thinking logically. But why do I feel like a boy but I don't have those body parts? And it turns out, well, actually, you were born with them, but it was a little funny looking. And so we thought, oh, it's probably a mistake. He's probably a girl. And all that to say, they're fighting to not let that happen so that children can actually figure out who they are based on their personality and uh, the way they're wired. And additionally, to go through puberty, see what their body does when it gets to puberty.
Mhm.
So I guess people will use that as an example of, oh yeah, they're figuring out who they are. Yeah, but mostly in a biological sense, they're figuring out who they are.
Right.
Um, and that again is such a rare situation. And again, it's 100% rooted in biology. It
Mhm.
does nothing for the transgender argument. Nothing.
Mhm.
The fact that some poor kid at some point they could equally go one way or another and they don't know what to do. And so they decide to just kind of ride the line and be a non-binary they, them. They are such a rare case And yet they think, oh, well, this excuses my behavior.
Right.
I'm not sure where I fit in, socially speaking, so I'm going to completely take advantage of this. And even though they're functionally, obviously, a male or a female.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing that drives me nuts is they are boosting the numbers of cases in which intersex people are born. So I wanted to bring up my notes, but I give the statistics in a response video I do on Cross Examine. But basically, you've got this tiny, tiny percentage. I think it's something like 0.005. I mean, it's like minute number of people that are legitimately born with ambiguous genitalia. And this is what we call intersex. To make that number appear bigger, they are now including people with chromosomal anomalies. And what I mean by that is to ever say men, there's only XX female and XY male. That's it. It's not true. And we've got to stop saying that, because the people on the left and will immediately jump on that and say, wow, then that just proves how little you know. There's more than that. Correct. There is. 98% of the population, that's what it is. XY, you're a male. If you've got that Y chromosome present, XX, you're a female. It's very simple. Again, we have chromosomal anomalies where there are men that are XYY. There are women who are XXX. There are men who are XXY. So there are other variations. The thing is, most of the time, it still doesn't affect their identity. My best friend, her brother, they discovered he had a variety of different health issues. They took him along to be tested for everything, couldn't figure out what was going on. After a genetics test as a last resort, they found out that he had XXY. And I forget the name of the syndrome, but it's a well-known syndrome. This guy would be categorized as intersex because of this chromosomal anomaly. And yet, looking at him, there's no question. This is a man. You ask him, there's no question. I am a man. But he had two X chromosomes. Now, unfortunately, that comes with health issues, which sucks. And one of them being that he will be infertile, as any man is with the two X's. My own son, we found out when he was 3, because he's on the autism spectrum, he is XYY. Which kind of makes him, they sort of joke, oh, he's a Superman because he's got the 2 Y chromosomes. My son, by this definition, is intersex. And yet, clearly, he's so obviously a little boy in every aspect.
Right.
It's just ridiculous to incorporate people with these conditions as part of this ambiguous, vague cloud of people wrestling with their identity.
Right.
They're not. Most men who have XYY have no idea they have it. Most, yeah. Same thing. Okay. There was a case recently of a young boy. He was a boy through and through. They raised him that way. Come around the age of 11 or 12, he starts feeling excruciating abdominal pain. They take him to the doctor. Turns out the kid has ovaries, and his ovaries are trying to menstruate. The media runs with the story and says, okay, so this is an example. He was actually a girl. Oh, no, this is a boy with a period. This is a poor little boy who had an anomaly in his body that was not meant to be there. Surgeon went in, removed them, because this is a little boy, and the problem was solved. But they'll use this as these pathetic examples of how boys can get periods and things like that. And it's like, no, his body couldn't produce the period. That's why he was in such excruciating pain.
Right.
It wasn't meant to be there. And
yeah. And if they were to actually put this tampon dispenser in a boy's bathroom in a high school, the chances of it ever being used by a biological male is 0. Unless, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're going to use, if they use that excuse to do that, because they're doing that. They're doing that these days. They're putting these in there, but they're really putting them in there. Aren't they really putting them in there for, well, I don't know. Are they really putting them in there for girls, biological girls who identify as males? I don't think they're doing that. Aren't they making the statement like males can have periods too, so we got to put tampons in there? I don't think that they care if they're necessarily being used, right? It's just to do this whole, everybody can have, like, men can have periods and they can carry babies, and birthing persons, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do you know the mentality behind even that?
So it's twofold. On the one hand, it's 100% virtue signaling. In the same way that using pronouns is 100% virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Someone like you look at the people who actually list their pronouns and they are so obviously a man or so obviously a woman that the introduction of a pronoun is utterly redundant. It's
Hmm.
virtue signaling. It's a definition of virtue signaling. Like, oh, I'm an ally. Like
Right.
uh, it's like me having my profile up and saying white. I identify as white. No one needed to be told that. One, they're not going to ever address me by my whiteness. Hey, white person. It's
Right.
just not going to come up. Just like I'm not going to go up to a guy and say, "Hi, I noticed you're a he." Like I'm never going to do that. I'm just going to say, "Hi, hi, Bob."
Yeah.
Um, and when they're not around, I'm probably going to refer to them as they,
Mhm.
uh, and or maybe a he, but guess what? They're not there to hear it, so what do we care?
Right.
That's a side issue, but yeah, so definitely virtue signaling, and then yeah, it is for the fraction of biological females who identify as men, and since identity trumps biology, in that sense, you're a menstruating man. But it's just absurd, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's just so absurd, and the whole men can get pregnant. Well, what they mean is a biological female who identifies as a male can get pregnant.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
yeah.
That makes sense. So we kind of talked about it from your research. What do you find is the reason that they're, struggling with their identity now more than ever? Because I feel like there's never been a more a time of acceptance in our culture where you can just come out of the closet, there is no closet anymore. We've taken the closet,
Mhm.
curtains been pulled. I mean, it's about being your authentic self. Yeah, like you said, if this was something that really solved all these problems and it brought fulfillment and satisfaction, why are we not seeing these suicide rates and depression rates and all that plummet? Why are we seeing them either stay steady or maybe be on the rise? We'll have to wait and see what happens with what the kids who transition and stuff, if they commit suicide in the next 5 to 10 years. What the suicide rates will tell us. But
Mm.
what are we seeing with that? Why is this such a decline in mental health in a culture that is so accepting?
That's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that is the question to present. Okay, so what I hear is the response to that is, oh, because we're not accepting enough. This is the world of social justice. You're always working for better outcomes, for equality, for being less white. You're always working to be more more something. It's the gospel of work. You are never enough. You've never done enough. It's not enough to be not racist. You need to be anti-racist. Now you can't just be anti-racist. You need to publicly speak out against your own race. Um, which is by definition racism, full circle. But now we're on the other end of it. So I'm trailing off again. What was the original question?
Yeah, the question is like, why are we seeing this decline in mental health if we are in this culture that is so accepting?
Yeah. So yeah, because of people like you and me who won't accept it for one, and for two, because it wasn't the solution to begin with. You're a confused girl that doesn't want to go through puberty. Maybe you've got a history of sexual abuse, which just breaks my heart. So all the more reason to want to hit pause or completely remove the possibility of developing into a physical woman.
Hmm.
So you take the surgery, you take the hormones, you're
Yeah.
still now just a broken bodied female that
Hmm.
now matches your heart in a way. You've got that trauma, you were fearful of moving into that next phase of physical development, you hit pause, you'll never be a man. Uh,
Hmm.
so now you're a broken woman, not in terms of your person, but in terms of your body. You've broken your
Right.
body.
Right.
Yeah. So the interesting thing that came that actually Matt Walsh said this just last week, and he's absolutely right. I've noticed it too. Is so okay. The number of girls identifying as males is at least 10 times the rate of the reverse. The interesting thing that you see is girls that choose to identify as men, it's not usually because they want to be men, it's because they don't want to be girls. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I love men. I think being a man is cool. I want to be that strong masculine leader. I want that power. It's more I don't want this. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to feel weak. I don't want to be under the sexual gaze. Yeah, it's about escaping all of that, especially the sexuality part, and especially if they've come out of a history of any kind of sexual abuse. For men, on the other hand, it tends to happen later, and it tends to come from an angle of this titillates me.
Mm-hmm.
The men that you see dressing in drag, and this, so again, I'm not talking about kids because you don't really see this as much with kids, but with the older group, you've got gay men who want to figure out how to up the ante. How can I be even more titillated? How can I be even more sexualized all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not enough to simply dress in female clothing and going and dancing somewhere in drag. It's now I need to step it up and actually pretend I'm a female and invite that sexual gaze. And I mean, all the men that you see parading around, okay, that's not fair. It's not all of them. But the ones that you see connected to drag that then choose to take it a step further and transition, it's not like they're walking around in Little House on the Prairie female wear, are they? They're not dressing like modest regular women. They're dressing to push their sexuality as much as possible. So it's a really weird motivation thing going on there. Yeah, there's some kind of sexual payoff going that route. Whereas for women, it's much more about escaping.
That
Yeah. Now, of course, it's not for all of them. I'm already thinking of a couple of men. For example, Rachel Levine, who doesn't represent their model at all, but somehow believes that he is a woman.
Mhm.
It's just become so common. You've got people who are genuinely experiencing this dysphoria that need help, and let's say Rachel Levine might fall into that category, even though it's strange that he would make the decision to transition so late in life, probably because, again, cultural acceptance, and it's all our fault that he couldn't do it earlier. When those things become celebrated, as he has been so much, I mean, he's Woman of the Year from
Mm.
Time Magazine and things like that. It opens the door for all the people who are just sort of on the fence, like, well,
Yeah.
maybe, and now, so it does such a disservice for the people who are genuinely suffering from this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, we will never know, but I guarantee, I mean, I would bet on it that he would not have gotten Man of the Year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, who cares about that? He's just your typical white male. But as soon as he transitions and comes out and he's this health and human services leader, director, whatever, then
Mhm.
that's something to celebrate. I mean, it is
Mhm.
so, when you just stop and think about it, you don't have to get any further than that. He got an
Mhm.
award for claiming to be a woman,
Mhm.
was promoted to the health and human services department, and he got Woman of the Year. It's
Mhm.
insanity. The people who are promoting this, God help them to repent, because I fear for when they stand before the Lord with as many as they're condoning and affirming and applauding and standing at the helm of this, the puberty blockers and all that for kids. I mean, oh my gosh, it's a scary thought, because
And that's
nobody is thinking about the eternal consequence here, because if they were, they wouldn't be doing this in the first place.
Mhm. And that's an important point you raised, because that, I believe, is our biggest problem in the USA and elsewhere, but right now we're focusing on the USA. The problem isn't the tiny, tiny fraction of people suffering with this mental disorder. It's the millions that
Mhm.
celebrate it.
Yeah.
The millions that celebrate it. I understand why this poor soul is putting on a dress or wants to have their breasts removed. They're already suffering statistically from either depression or anxiety. They may be on the autism spectrum. They most likely have some kind of history of sexual abuse. Anyone, just pick one of those, and that's enough to make them pursue this as an option for them.
Yeah.
They're also trying to gain social um, credential. So middle school and high school, it's not cool to be gay anymore. If you can be trans, trans trumps gay, no question.
Yeah.
But non-binary trumps gay. So if you're looking to be cool, that's your ticket.
Yeah.
So all these pressures, I understand that, right? As an adult, I understand that. What I don't understand and what I don't tolerate are the millions and millions of healthy, mentally healthy individuals who are not saving them,
Mhm.
who are letting them hurt themselves.
Yeah.
That is what is unforgivable.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. And in Romans, it reminds me of Romans 1 because, you look at Romans 1 and you see all these people that are actually being the ones who are participating in the worship of the creation rather than the creator, exchanging the truth for the lie, the ones who are exchanging God's natural design for a male being with the female and a female being with the male, and them entering into this is basically talking about homosexuality here. But when we get down to verses 28 to 32, it says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. And then this is the verse that gets me about the ones who are giving hearty approval to the transgender movement, but aren't necessarily the ones who are transitioning themselves. It says,
Hmm.
knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who
Mm.
practice them. So we might think, well, we're not doing that. But if you're approving of it, you're participating and you're
Hmm.
still on the wrong side of where God wants us to be. And another thing is when we don't stand up for it and we don't speak the truth about it and we say, well, I'm going to stay out of this one right now. We're literally letting all these kids go to the room to get their puberty blockers without at least voicing that this is wrong, that without standing up and speaking the truth of it. And I don't know, I'm not saying that is, yes, you're giving your approval and God doesn't like it. I'm not saying that. What I am
Mm.
saying though is that we have to be careful of our passivity, because I
Yes.
believe that is where we are to be either, to
Yeah.
say, am I being passive with this? Because being quiet about it is being passive. We don't want
Yes.
the target on us, and it is scary. But if enough people which I believe statistically, there are enough people in the United States who do not agree with this,
Yeah.
that they would all voice their opinions and stand up for what's right. Like, I won't support Disney anymore. And I liked to go to Disneyland. When I lived in
Hmm.
California, we went to Disneyland all the time. Now I live over on the East Coast. I would love to go to Disney World. I know what Disney's doing with their money. I know
Mm.
what they're creating and promoting, and I'm not going to give them my money. Now, I
Hmm.
hope that Disney will flip flop and go back, but they've already felt the pain in their pocketbook because a lot of other people have said the same thing. I'm not going to support this right now because you've come out and there's no secret about your agenda. And I
Hmm.
think that when people want to say what they're promoting, we have to say, okay, then I'm not going to support that. When enough people speak up and it hurts, they back off. And hopefully people will back off enough to hopefully enough people will stand up and speak to where people will want to back off enough to where we change this and turn this around.
Yeah.
That happen? I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know. I'm just praying that it does. So a couple last questions here, because these are the ones that I want the listener to be able to say, okay, now what do I do about this? Like, for one, if, I've seen Christians with their pronouns in their profiles, like you said,
Mm. Hmm.
Phoenix. And I'm like, why? I don't know why we participate in that, but let's just talk about some practical things that we might see. Um, if someone wants us to call them by their preferred pronouns, I've seen where Christians have said before, well, it's loving to do that, what do you say about that? And then secondly, if they change their name, like Rachel Levine, do we call him Rachel? I mean, I don't even know what his actual other name was, to be honest with you, but
Yeah.
what would you suggest with those two scenarios?
Yeah. It is never loving to lie to someone. Um, Now, I know people disagree with it. Like, sure it is. If someone puts on a jacket and they say, "How do I look in this?" and they look hideous, then the right thing to do is say, "You look great." I disagree. It is not the loving thing to do. If they look awful, you're sending that person out into public to look awful. Now,
Yeah.
you don't have to say, "You look awful." You can say, let's try something else. I There is a way to be honest and kind. It's not like they're mutually exclusive things, and
Right.
that's insane. So if someone wants you to refer to them as their preferred pronoun, I would gently, respectfully, and lovingly decline. Just say, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I love you. I respect you. I don't agree with your view on how gender relates to biology. So I'm not going to participate in uh, that narrative, basically, with you. But I love you and I care about you. And I hope that you can distinguish the difference between loving someone and affirming what they believe."
Mhm.
And I mean, really, it comes down to what kind of relationship have you already built with this person.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's loving or appropriate to go and berate your Starbucks barista with, "Oh, I notice you're a he, they. I'm not going to call you that." Like, what? Leave them alone. No
Hmm.
one asked you.
Right.
Um, they've got their own stuff they're dealing with, and so long as they're not imposing it on you, back off.
Right.
But when it's being brought into your church, when it's being brought into your life by people you have a relationship with, and they want you to bend to their demands, you're politely, respectfully, lovingly decline. In terms of names, I don't have a problem with people changing their name because names are fluid in terms of what gender they're connected to. The fact that, I mean, obviously, someone who changes the name from Bob to Rachel is going for a gender assigned name like Rachel.
Hmm.
But I mean, in 3 years from now, it wouldn't surprise me if little boys were being called Rachel and they were being presented as a boy. I mean, I meet little girls called Dylan. I meet
Hmm.
it's more the other way. You meet more little girls with these
Right.
traditionally male names, and I'm like, all right, whatever. It's weird. I don't care. I don't care. Uh, I'm called Phoenix. I don't care. Um, so that I would grant them, but um, I wouldn't participate with the pronoun. Not for a second. No.
I agree
Yeah.
with you. I agree with you 100%. So I want to talk to you about how parents should be proactive with this with their kids. Not every one of my listeners homeschools or sends their kids to a private Christian school. There's public school families out there. I was a public school family for a
Yeah.
very long time and a public school teacher. So uh, I know that families need to be proactive about this. They can't just sit around and wait for it to come up. So one, how do they do that? And then maybe even if they find themselves struggling with the kid who's like, I'm struggling with my identity, like I might think I'm the opposite sex. What do you think about that? Or what
Yeah.
would you suggest?
So for the one that hasn't come forward yet and said that to their parent, I would definitely recommend getting out in front of it. It's the same approach I would take with sex conversations. Like, I'm not going to have a sex conversation with my 6-year-old, but I'm not going to just leave it on the table until they bring it to me. If they've brought it to me, if maybe they won't ever bring it to me, but if I'm waiting for that, they've already asked their peers. It's already come up among their classmates. So it's better to present yourself as an authority on something and by bringing it up first. You need to be, you need to use your own discretion about when that's appropriate for your child, but lean toward you need to bring it up first. You need to guide that conversation. Don't wait for them to probably never bring it up because maybe they don't know how to talk about it with you, and don't wait for them to get their information from their peers and from social media. Good grief. Please, if any of your children are on social media, get them off.
Yeah.
They're that's another episode. Get them off.
Hmm.
Um, but Yeah, lead the conversation, know what you're talking about. Don't roll in with statements like, because there's only two genders, you know that, right? You've immediately declared that you're not a safe space to discuss and tease out these ideas.
Mhm.
Have them bring to you what they think and challenge their thinking by asking questions, and not questions that sound like you're looking to trap them. Your kid is not stupid. They know what a leading question is, they know when they're being directed toward a trap. So you've got to ask in such a way and with such a tone that you sound genuinely interested in their answers, not I'm waiting to flip a gotcha back at them.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
yeah. And then for the parent that's got a child, already announcing that they are in a, they're in the wrong body, that kind of thing. That that's a tough one because they've already been really kind of like baptized with that ideology. If they're already speaking that way, it means that they are already in a community that thinks likewise, and the community matters more to them than you do.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard stories of parents pulling their kids out of public school, getting them off social media when those kinds of things have started to present, and that was the saving
Mm.
step for their kid, because this is so socially, this is so impacted by social pressure. I truly don't know how you're going to win that conversation if your child is already convinced of something and they value their community over you. That's a challenging one because you can take them to therapy. I mean, like, the best thing again I would do is the gentle questioning, the no dismissive language, no, that's ridiculous. Say, okay, you really think this? Why? Let's talk about it. Why do you think that? And you've just got to, I mean, honestly, the whole ideology collapses on itself. So if you know how to ask the questions, they can't support their position.
Right.
Uh, but you need to let them realize they can't support it on their own time. So you present the question and have them think about it. Don't wait for a, oh gosh, you're right, mom. I never thought of it that way, because that's a pride thing. And most kids don't want to admit that maybe they were wrong, or,
Right.
and then the biggest problem is when your kid can't back up their position. They know they can't, but they don't care. And
Mm.
that is the description of actually most of the country, with a number of things. Like, you can challenge their belief on something, they cannot back it up, but they don't really care that they can't back it up because they're comfortable with it.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's I can't recommend anything more than keep the conversation going. Do not close it off by uh, saying anything in a dismissive tone, challenging why they think they do the way they do, talking about some statistics in a very open-ended way. Like, well, what do you think of these stats that some people are coming through? Because this kid will probably bring their own stats. Like, yeah, well, I heard that actually it really reduces the risk of suicide. And they're right, it does, for about like 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
And then it circles back, and then these adults realize, actually, I've still got all the problems that I had before. So meet them with that. Treat them like a smart person. If they're having those kinds of opinions about their gender identity, they want to be taken seriously, and they should be taken seriously.
Yeah. Those are good tips. I think sometimes you're going to feel, I mean, a lot of the times that happens, you're going to feel huge emotions and probably be reeling from, what you heard if it's taken you by surprise. But it'd probably be nice, Phoenix, if you thought about, like, since you write, maybe some warning signs parents can look for, conversations they can have before. Like, let's say maybe before you even get to anything, when the kids are young, this is how you talk to your kids. Warning signs in case you haven't talked to your kids, but you're starting to see something. And then how do I address it if it comes to me? Because people are going to need that resource. They're going to need that tool
Mm.
of all three of those situations. Like, you got to get to them first. We see that in
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs. What the first one, to plead his cause, seems right
Mm-hmm.
until someone comes and cross-examines him, right? Until
Yeah.
someone else can say, wait, does this align to reality? Is this the truth? What does God's word say about it? So if we get to them first and you, like you said, establish yourself as the expert, the kids are gonna be like, okay, mom and dad have already told me this. And then if they hear it from peers or they hear it from their teachers or whoever they're getting it from, they're going to say, wait, we already talked about this. We talked about why it doesn't align to reality, because you've already presented the truth and the facts to them. Say that
Mhm.
doesn't happen. You see warning signs. Oh my gosh, I'm starting to see these things. I need to go talk to my kids. How do I do that? Because the emotional aspect of this is often going to get in the way if you're blindsided by it. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
a parent, that's going to be like, whoa. And I think that parents are going to be, like you said, it's then that they take the social media away. It's then that they start, having all of these boundaries. But that is a precautionary thing that should be happening in the earlier stages. Like I have a 13-year-old.
Mhm.
He's not getting a phone. If when he gets a phone, he'll get a flip phone. Now he is in baseball, so my husband will let him borrow his phone for the day or whatever it may be. But I'm like, no, we don't get social media either. And we talk about these things as much as we can. So we're doing
Mm.
what we can do to be proactive. But I really think parents are going to need a resource for all three situations, because we're going to have
Mm.
parents in all three situations. So something
Mhm.
to think about that I think would be amazing if you were able to write something and provide that. Which, by the way, Phoenix, you are on social media. Where can we find you? How can people look you up and follow you for more great information and tips that you just gave us?
Oh, so first off, that's a great idea. I do need to write that resource. I am gonna work on that.
Yes.
Um, yeah, yeah, I'm just Phoenix Hayes on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I am looking forward to finally launching a YouTube channel, but right now I'm tied up with everything else that I do. So it'll happen eventually. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Phoenix, it's either Phoenix Hayes or Phoenix_Hayes, depending on which username was available.
Well, I will make sure I put all that in the show notes. And I really, really appreciate it. I know you've been compiling this information and you can tell you got it all in here in the brain of yours. And I was fascinated by some of that stuff that you gave to us. So I'm really appreciative that you're here. For those of you that are listening, go ahead and find Phoenix on all the socials. And if you can't for some reason, because you couldn't find her handle, I'll have it in the show notes for you. You can go there and just click the link. It'll take you right to that. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.